This is KSL Sunday Edition with Boyd Matheson.
Welcome to Sunday Edition. I am Boyd Matheson. Each Sunday we attempt to divide the rage from the reason, elevate the conversation, connect the dots, and make the news make sense. We have conversations with great thinkers, great leaders, and great people making a difference. We talk politics so we can discuss society, and we explore society so we can discuss principles and the people in America who actually live them. We bring the best and brightest to Utah, and we send the Utah model to our nation's capital and beyond. Well, this past Monday evening at sunset, Passover began for those of the Jewish faith. There are many lessons from that first Passover, as well as all the Passovers that have followed. All of those lessons can apply to each of us today, especially as we struggle with the often dark, uncertain, and sometimes overwhelming state of the world. Conflict in the Middle East, acts of anti-Semitism, hate, anger, fear, and frustration abound on so many fronts. I believe the world's been cast into this kind of uncertainty before, and we know there is a way out and a way up, and ultimately the darkness will yield to the dawning of a new day if we just bring it. Rabbi Brad Hirschfield is the co-founder and executive editor of the Wisdom Daily. Brad also serves as president of the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership, a leadership training institute, think tank, and resource center in New York City. And Rabbi Brad joins us from New York City today. Welcome back to the program.
It's really a pleasure to be here, Boyd. Thank you for having me.
So as you've been going through this Passover week, you and I have had some conversations about both that first Passover and those that have followed and the lessons that really can apply to us today. Give us some perspective and some history in terms of where we've been and what it means to us now.
Sure. And they really are for this moment as much as they were for that first Passover some 3,200 years ago. And in fact, in Jewish tradition, that first Passover, called the Passover of Egypt, is thought to be distinct from every other Passover since, but distinct in a way that, boy, I don't know a time in my lifetime that we, Jewish or not, Passover observant or not, have needed more. Because you see, that first Passover was celebrated the night before the Israelite slaves were actually free. It is the embodiment of what has been called the audacity of hope, the willingness to believe, as I think you have said before, in the triumph of possibility over probability. You see, there they were 3,200 years ago, gathered in slave quarters that they had inhabited for hundreds of years, on the promise that tomorrow morning they would go free. And on that promise, they dared to celebrate freedom. And in the willingness to celebrate that which had not yet arrived, they helped make it happen. And I think that's really the key. At the darkest of moments, the choice that all of us have in every one of those dark moments, and we have all had them, sometimes communal, sometimes personal, but the choice that's always there is to be like those Israelites, and with no naivete about the straits we are in, to still dare to celebrate that which could come if we would let ourselves see it, believe in it, and help make it happen.
Yeah, that really is that. It's see and then be and become part of that as we move forward. One of the other things that you have pointed out, Rabbi Brad, is this whole idea that this was an incremental process, this Passover process, that it wasn't just this big Exodus moment, but there were a lot of things that led up to that were small and seemingly insignificant. Seems like there's some lessons in that for us today as well.
There definitely are, and with all due respect to Cecil B. DeMille, which is where I think most people know the biblical narrative from, and not from Scripture, although even many of us were raised reading it in Scripture, perhaps the best example of a small thing that is really a huge thing, that turns into a huger thing, is that famous phrase, "Let my people go." When "let my people go" was first said, and said 3 different times by Moses to Pharaoh, he was actually not asking for the liberation of the Israelites from slavery. He was asking for a few days off to worship God. He was asking for freedom of religious expression, and he was asking for a little bit of time. And we could all reasonably say, really? That's all he asked for? Hundreds of years of slavery, of brutality, and all he asked was for a couple days off to exercise freedom of religious conscience? and a little bit of time? And the answer is yes, because those seemingly small things are in fact huge. Those seemingly small things were the beginning of inviting Pharaoh to see the world a little differently. Not to give up everything he believed in, not to give up on the empire he had, not to give up on his ability to enslave all these hundreds of thousands of Israelites, but simply to acknowledge that even in his slaves, there was a fundamental humanity. There was a fundamental spiritual dignity, and that they had a right to worship as they saw fit. And even at least as important, that unlike the typical day of a slave, who doesn't control their own time ever, that they had a right to a couple days off. Yeah. They could go back to being slaves afterwards. And of course, that's really, I think, where the biggest changes happen, unless we're talking about coercing them, is we invite others to think about the world just a little bit differently, just a little more empathically, just a little more compassionately, with just a bit more dignity. We don't have to give up everything we believe. We just widen the frame of reference. And in widening that frame of reference, which is what Moses asked of Pharaoh, look what happens. A whole people goes free.
Yeah. Just in our last minute here, very quickly, Rabbi Brad, I think there's something that I've been focused on during this Passover week in terms of the lessons of suffering, that you either get that earned empathy, that you either become a little more compassionate, or sometimes we become either indifferent or indignant and angry with the struggler, the stranger, those that are suffering. Just give us a 30 seconds on what we should do to really honor Passover week and how we can be better fellow travelers with our fellow citizens.
Well, I think what we can remember is that if we get angry, if we get frustrated, we can honor that. The fact is, the people at whom we're angry may really be in the wrong. And yet, with all that, they remain human beings created in the image of God. Frankly, whether you believe in God or not, believe in that fact. Created in the image of God, just as we are. And then figure out how to honor both that endless image of Godness of every human being, and the fact that we may think they're dead wrong in a certain situation, but the fact that they're deeply wrong doesn't mean they're any less human.
That power of that human dignity and a kind of radical empathy that I think we need both globally, we need it as a country, we need it as a society, and we need it right in our own homes. And I think this is a great week for us to come back to some of those core principles. Rabbi Brad Hirschfield, thanks so much for joining us on Sunday Edition today.
Thank you.
Stay with us. Sunday Edition continues on KSL TV. We have a crucial conversation on social media coming up next. Stick around. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. Well, it's time to lean into a crucial conversation in our communities regarding social media and our young people in particular. Up to 95% of youth ages 13 to 17 report using a social media platform, with more than a third saying they are using social media almost constantly. Nearly 60% of all teenage girls say they've been contacted on social media by a stranger in ways that made them feel uncomfortable. Over the past decade, youth worldwide are feeling lonelier, more isolated, and more disconnected than ever before. We're very pleased to have joining us in studio today Aimee Winder-Newton, who is a senior advisor to Governor Cox and director of the Office of Families, who's really been leading the states of Utah's response to these challenges and important, crucial conversations. And Aimee, welcome to Sunday Edition.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So give us the high level on this. There's a lot going on, obviously, as it relates to social media. From your unique perch and chair, what does it look like? What should the conversation be?
Well, the sad thing is, since the invention of social media, youth worldwide are feeling lonelier than ever before. And this is causing so many mental health challenges that we're very concerned about. Governor Cox, as we've been looking at ways to be preventative in youth mental health, recognizes social media as one of the big causes. And so, you know, we've been doing all kinds of things, from legislation to lawsuits to an education campaign to warn parents of the harms of social media for their kids.
Yeah, well, let's unpack some of those things. Let's start with just some of the high-level concerns in terms of what are we seeing in terms of impact, particularly here in the state of Utah as it relates to young people. I know young women in particular seem to be hardest hit with a lot of things happening on social media.
Yeah, in fact, 53% of our Utah young women, young teens, feel persistently sad or hopeless for 2 weeks or more during the year. So to me, that's devastating. If we have half of our teen girls who are dealing with sadness and hopelessness, not good. 18% of our Utah youth seriously considered suicide in the past year. So we're very concerned about that. Even things like 38% of our Utah youth only got or didn't even get 8 hours of sleep during an average school night. Like that's not good. That's not good for their learning. It's not good for their mental health. So we're concerned about these stats that we're seeing.
I think all of those, from the sleep deprivation that we always say kids never get enough sleep, but now they're really not, because they're just staying online all night long. Young men are spending a lot of time on gaming and that disconnection from reality. Young women, that viewing life through comparison is just always fatal vision. And then the suicide ideation component, I think, is so bad. Talk to us about some of the things you're doing in terms of some of the tools for parents and for youth.
Yeah, so we just recently had 2 of our bills passed during the legislative session. Last year we passed 2 bills that were kind of first in the country as far as our state legislation goes, that would help protect kids from the harms of social media. Those 2 bills were repealed and replaced this year with some that will do a great job giving parents tools to help monitor what's going on, set time limits, that type of thing. It will require age verification. So if an account is a minor account, then it shifts into having more privacy and things like that. So we've got a lot of things in place there legislatively. But as far as like this campaign that we have great resources for parents online. They can go to socialharms.utah.gov. We have all the data there so people can see what's going on. We have our TV ads from the campaign and other information. Our U.S. Surgeon General just came out this last year with the same concerns about social media and mental health for youth. And so we have some of his information there. And then a parent presentation.
In fact, I want to talk about that, because that was one of the things that I love going. Again, you can go to socialharms.utah.gov and just describe a little bit how that presentation for parents that facilitate a conversation with their youth. I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, so if you go to the website, you can download this PowerPoint. It's basically a plug and play. So you can have conversations in church groups, school groups, with your family, wherever, and talk about social media and the harms to mental health, and help educate and have those discussions. So important for parents to have these discussions with their kids and to really understand what's going on. I mean, I don't know if we really get it, if we really understand what they're dealing with as they're seeing all the negative feedback and dealing with addictive algorithms and things like that. So it's a really great tool to be able to have these conversations.
Yeah, and I love the way that you've gone about this, because there's a legislative component to it, there is a community component to it, there's a family component, there's an education component to it. So it really is surround sound in terms of the kinds of resources we need, because otherwise we aren't going to get it until it's too late.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And so just talk to us just in our last couple of minutes here in terms of some of the other things that you're seeing, or some of the other conversations you're hoping we get to. Again, I think the data we get and understand, and everybody says, oh, that's so awful and terrible. And yet sometimes we're more comfortable letting our kids walk around with all of that in their pocket on a phone, but we don't let them go outside or cross the street to go play with a neighbor. How do we get to not bubble wrapping them in the physical world, but letting them go free range when it comes to the social side?
Yeah, well, we like to say we need to disconnect to reconnect. And one of the things that our kids are missing out right now on is what you say, free play, being able to go outside, climb a tree, take some risks. That actually helps decrease anxiety in our kids. But some of the tips that we have for families is have more time where you have devices put away. Make sure that you've got that time where, whether it's having dinner together or watching a movie or whatever, that everyone, including parents, because we're not great examples most of the time on this, that we all put our devices away and that we prioritize that one-on-one human connection. Human connection is such a great driver for positive mental health. So that's one thing that we can do. The most important thing we say to parents is delay. Do not give your kids a device with the internet and social media when they're teens. It's not good. It's not good for them. Delay as long as you can. Even the Surgeon General says 13 is way too young to have social media. Look at 16, 17, 18 when your kids are more mature, depending on their level. But we really are just encouraging parents, you have to be brave, and it's not easy. And there's some things you can do to wean off by setting some limits. So we need them to to stand up and be brave.
Yeah, parents is not for wimps, and this is a time where parents do have to really stand up and be that parent sometimes. Say, no, we are going to delay, or we are going to not allow it in the bedroom late at night or all through the night. Those are all just crucial parts of this, and I think all of us as parents should do the same process in terms of disconnecting a little more so that we can actually connect on that level. Aimee Winder-Newton, as always, great to have you in the studio.
Thanks for having me.
Important, crucial conversation. Thanks for leading it, and again, all points of the compass, I think, is what really matters. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, we'll step aside for one last break, come back with some final thoughts on Sunday Edition. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. To those people who live in the fingerprint business, we're going to have a little message for you today. We live in a look-at-me kind of world where drawing attention to yourself has been transformed from an annoyingly childish trait of self-absorbed self-promoters to a near requirement to compete and get ahead in the digital world. I'm convinced that the best way to get ahead is to simply leave your fingerprints behind. My favorite people in the world are in the fingerprint business, those extraordinary souls who reflect light rather than grab it, who elevate the performance of others rather than touting their own, the servant leaders who promote the success of the team while deflecting praise for their own leadership. No individual is more influential or leaves more of a lasting legacy than the master fingerprinters. Recently, I was reading a book written by just such a master fingerprinter, my good friend Teresa Deer, who's a national board member for the NAACP and an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. The title of her book, Inadequate, Unprepared, but Ready, is worthy of a deep dive read for all of us. Teresa Deer described the master fingerprinters this way: you continue to serve not for the compensation, but because of the cause and the assignment. Because you have served others for so long without recognition, you've demonstrated the capacity to sincerely serve. You've shown that you can serve without making demands or being demanding. You've shown you can serve not out of duty, but out of the depths of your heart. Well, for many years in a number of different organizations, including businesses, the United States Senate, and a public policy think tank, I've regularly given what I call the Fingerprint Award to members of the team who had done something behind the scenes that created influence, added value, or simply made a difference. Sometimes it would be a line or a phrase that suddenly was being used to frame an issue without attribution. Sometimes it was the team member who had elevated a colleague in front of a customer or a client. Other times it was a staff member creating a unique experience for a special visitor, or even better, for someone who would never have expected to receive the royal treatment. Now, great editors and ghostwriters understand the necessary but rarely recognized work of helping a journalist, a reporter, an author, or an executive deliver something of value to the public. One such professional wrote, "Everybody you work with has their own voice, and if you do your job well and do it well enough, even their closest friends or their partner of 40 years isn't going to recognize the fingerprints of a ghostwriter." Being willing to set your own ego aside and work tirelessly to elevate others' expression is what I call very fingerprinty. I happen to know one editor who is so extraordinarily good at being fingerprinty in his professional and personal life that he could actually be classified as an international man of mystery. Now, I love to shoot a text or a call to my communication strategist, speechwriter, or influencer colleagues to point out that I saw their fingerprints on a speech, on a column, an event, or a news report. The thing about those in the fingerprint business is that if you actually look closely and observe carefully, you can spot them occasionally. They usually have a knowing smile on their face, recognizing internally that they've made a difference without anyone else knowing or noticing. It's the speechwriter watching their boss deliver the perfect line perfectly in front of an energized audience. The parent watching their child perform at their very best in a concert or an athletic event. It's the cook looking on from the kitchen while the server gets credit for a fine dining experience. Or the teacher observing the struggling student stand with confidence in front of their peers. the visual ed professional who makes a newspaper possible, powerful and readable from behind the scenes, witnessing someone rave about a stunning front page or a compelling inside spread. Or maybe even the auto shop owner, seeing a young mechanic explain how they found and fixed the car problem to a thankful customer with great confidence. And the list goes on and on. President Ronald Reagan may have framed the fingerprinter's creed with a plaque that sat on his desk in the Oval Office, which read, "There is no limit to what a man can do or where he can go. If he doesn't mind, who gets the credit?" We all would do well to watch for and leave fingerprints. Looking for those whose fingerprints have impacted your life, large and small, directly and by extension, will make you humble and a little more grateful. Leaving such fingerprints will give you meaning and make your days actually matter. In a recent interview with the New York Times, Charles Schwab CEO Walt Bettinger tells the story of the most impactful test he ever took in college. It was the final exam for which he had studied diligently and felt he was prepared to ace it. Yet the business course test contained a question that he was not expecting. In fact, the test contained only one single question. Bettinger described it this way. He said the teacher handed out the final exam, and it was on one piece of paper, which really surprised him because he figured it was going to be much longer than that. Once everyone had their paper, the instructor said, "Go ahead and turn it over." Both sides of the paper were blank. And the professor said, "I've taught you everything I can teach you about business in the last 10 weeks, but the most important message, the most important question is this. What's the name of the lady who cleans this building?" Bettinger had no idea. He concluded in the end, her name was Dottie, and I didn't know Dottie. I'd seen her, but I'd never taken the time to ask her name. In failing the test, Bettinger learned an important lesson and said, "I've tried to know every Dottie I've worked with ever since." Well, Dottie was in the fingerprint business, and Bettinger has become a fingerprint seeker. Far away from the camera lights and microphones, distant from stages and platforms, removed from awards, accolades, and adoration, is where fingerprints are left, especially those fingerprints that never fade from the lives and hearts we can touch through very intentional actions. Well, that wraps it up for us today on Sunday Edition. I'm Boyd Matheson. Thanks so much for joining us. And as always, as you go out into the world today, make sure you see something that inspires, say something that uplifts, and do something that makes a difference. Even leave a fingerprint or two. Music and the spoken word is next.